"I want a divorce. I don't need a sick husband." Those were the exact words, glowing with a harsh, synthetic light on the screen of my smartphone, delivered on the night before I was scheduled to be carved open on a surgical table. They say that when a bridge collapses, it isn't usually due to a sudden explosive impact. It happens because of microscopic stress fractures, tiny fissures in the steel, that accumulate over years of bearing a heavy load until, one day, the structural integrity simply ceases to exist. My marriage didn't end with a screaming match. It ended with a text message sent in the dead of night, delivered with the mechanical efficiency of an executioner swinging an axe. The woman occupying the hospital bed next to mine, a complete stranger whose name I hadn't even known 12 hours earlier, quietly slipped her pale, trembling fingers through the tangled mess of intravenous tubes connecting me to a small army of vital monitors. She grasped my hand firmly, anchoring me to reality without uttering a single word. Her silence carried more weight, more genuine human empathy than the woman I had spent the last decade of my life married to. "If we both manage to survive this impending butcher's shop," I said, my voice thick and ragged from dehydration and the sheer weight of the exhaustion pressing down on my chest, "we should just get married. Cut out the middleman entirely." The strange woman let out a short, sudden laugh, a dry, raspy sound that echoed sharply against the sterile walls of the hospital ward. Right at that exact moment, the heavy wooden door to our room swung open. The night shift nurse stepped inside to check our vitals, took one look at our intertwined hands and the dark, unreadable expressions on our faces, and turned completely white, as if she had just walked into a room heavily armed with live explosives. I simply couldn't put the phone down. That is the particular agonizing detail that nobody ever warns you about when you receive the absolute worst news of your entire existence. Sometimes, your physical body simply refuses to let go of the very instrument that just violently shattered your life into a million unrecognizable pieces. You stare intensely at the screen, your thumb hovering over the glass, operating under the deeply irrational, desperate delusion that if you just hold on to it long enough, if you stare hard enough, the cruel, jagged words might magically rearrange themselves into something survivable. A bad joke, a hack, a terrible mistake, but they didn't. The letters remained rigidly fixed in place, delivering their lethal payload over and over again. "My name is Daniel Marsh. I am 41 years old. Professionally, I am a senior structural engineer. For the past 12 years, I have dedicated my life to designing bridges. Not the small, decorative overpasses that span sleepy creeks, but the massive, towering leviathans of steel and concrete that safely carry tens of thousands of commuting vehicles across treacherous, deep-water rivers every single morning. I understand the intricate, unforgiving physics of load-bearing, tensile strength, and material fatigue. I am a highly trained expert in calculating the exact breaking point of the strongest alloys known to mankind. I can look at a blueprint and tell you precisely where a structure will fail under maximum stress. And yet, despite all of that elite, highly technical expertise, I was completely, utterly blind to the catastrophic failure actively occurring beneath my own 2 feet. I was standing directly on the fault line of a collapsing marriage, completely oblivious to the deafening groans of the straining steel. Rachel and I had been married since I was 29 years old. She was sharp, ruthlessly ambitious, and possessed a magnetic, almost predatory kind of charisma. She was the kind of woman who could walk into a crowded corporate boardroom and completely hijack the entire atmosphere with a single, perfectly articulated sentence. When we first met, I was deeply captivated by her relentless drive. I mistook her cold, calculating efficiency for strength. I assumed that her unyielding focus was a solid foundation upon which we could build a formidable life together. I was wrong. I had built a house on sand, assuming it was bedrock. The very first warning sign, the initial hairline fracture in the foundation, appeared exactly 8 months before I was scheduled for surgery. It didn't manifest as a sharp pain or a sudden collapse. It presented itself as a profound, inescapable exhaustion. The kind of bone-deep, suffocating lethargy that aggressively settles directly behind your eyes and absolutely refuses to move, regardless of how many hours of sleep you manage to scrape together. It felt as though someone had replaced the blood in my veins with wet concrete. My primary care physician, noticing the stark gray pallor of my skin during a routine checkup, immediately referred me to Dr. Patel, a highly respected surgical oncologist at St. Augustine's Medical Center. Hepatic mass, approximately 3 centimeters in diameter. The imaging is highly suspicious, Daniel. We need to operate, and we need to do it soon. Dr. Patel had informed me, delivering the news with the calm, flat professionalism of a man who makes a living negotiating with the Grim Reaper on a daily basis. I drove home that evening, with a death sentence riding shotgun in the passenger seat. The sun was setting, casting long, dark shadows across the dashboard. When I walked through the front door, Rachel was standing at the granite kitchen island. She was still wearing her sharp, tailored work blazer, casually sipping from a heavy crystal glass of red wine. I stood in the doorway, my hands shoved deep into the pockets of my jacket, and I told her exactly what the doctor had said. She didn't drop the glass. She didn't gasp. She didn't rush across the kitchen to throw her arms around me and tell me that we were going to fight this together. She simply stood there, perfectly still. She slowly lowered the wine glass to the marble countertop. And then she asked a highly practical, deeply chilling question about the extended medical leave policy at my engineering firm. She didn't ask, "Are you terrified?" She didn't ask, "What are our exact odds of beating this?" She didn't ask, "What do you need me to do right now?" She simply looked at me, her eyes cool and calculating, and asked, "What exactly is the timeline on this? Daniel, how long will your income be affected?" At that moment, the mind of a terrified, desperate man actively deceived itself. I aggressively rationalized her reaction. I told myself that her cold practicality was simply her unique coping mechanism. I convinced myself that she was shutting off her emotions so that she could be the strong, logical anchor I needed to navigate the incoming storm. I painted her as a pragmatic warrior preparing for a logistical battle. But what I absolutely should have noticed, the glaring crimson-red flag, whipping violently in the wind, was that she never accompanied me to a single medical appointment. Not one. There was always a highly convenient, aggressively defended excuse. Work is just incredibly demanding this quarter. I have a critical board meeting I absolutely cannot reschedule. I have an emergency flight to Chicago for a client acquisition. So I fought the battle alone, attending every single consultation with a cheap legal notepad resting on my knee. The night before the surgery, Rachel arrived home late. She casually kissed me on the cheek at exactly 9 o'clock, complaining about a headache, and announced that she desperately needed to get some sleep. Before she retreated to the master bedroom, she looked me directly in the eyes and promised, with a sickeningly sweet, entirely fabricated sincerity, that she would be waiting right there in the hospital room the exact moment I was wheeled out of the surgical recovery unit. Like an absolute fool, I believed her. That is the particular, agonizing cruelty of a slow, highly calculated betrayal. It isn't a sudden ambush, it is a meticulously engineered psychological conditioning. It actively trains you to keep investing your trust, to keep extending your loyalty, and to keep believing the beautiful lies right up until the exact moment you are standing over an empty abyss, with nothing left to hold on to. I officially checked into the pre-operative intake ward at St. Augustine's at 11 o'clock that night. My assigned room was a double unit, and the other bed 212, situated near the large window overlooking the dark city, was already occupied. The woman lying in bed 212 looked as though she had recently gone several brutal rounds in a cage match against something significantly larger and vastly more violent than herself. Her dark, heavy hair was loose, spilling chaotically over the stark white hospital pillows. Her skin was incredibly pale, possessing that specific, translucent quality that harsh, hospital fluorescent lighting forces upon everyone, aggressively stripping away all pretense and reducing human beings to their most vulnerable, honest physical state. She wasn't sleeping. She was lying completely motionless, staring intensely at the textured ceiling tiles, with an expression of profound, unyielding focus. "It doesn't actually get any more interesting, you know," she said. Her voice was slightly raspy, carrying the heavy weight of exhaustion. But she didn't bother to turn her head to look at me. I paused, halfway through unpacking a small duffel bag containing my toothbrush and a change of clothes that I hoped to eventually wear out of this place. I blinked in confusion. "Excuse me." She slowly turned her head. Her eyes were dark, sharp, and intensely intelligent. "The ceiling. I have been aggressively staring at that exact spot for the past 3 hours. I can assure you with absolute certainty that it is not going to suddenly yield any profound existential answers." "What exactly are you in for?" I appreciated the sheer, unvarnished bluntness of her approach. There was no fake sympathy, no hollow, polite small talk. Just the brutal efficiency of 2 soldiers sharing a trench on the eve of a major offensive. "The medical staff insists on calling it a thoracic mass," she continued, her lips twitching into a wry, cynical smirk. "I personally prefer to call it the world's most aggressive and overly dramatic houseguest. It refuses to leave, and it's slowly destroying the furniture." She paused, raising a dark eyebrow. "You?" "Liver," I replied, my voice flat. "Ah." She offered a single, slow nod. It was the solemn gesture of someone who deeply understood the terrifying, crushing gravity contained within those sterile, one-word medical diagnoses. "I am Elena, Daniel." We did not shake hands. The thick, restrictive tangle of IV lines tapped into our forearms made standard social pleasantries highly impractical. But a distinct, powerful acknowledgement passed between us anyway. It was that rare, unspoken recognition that instantly occurs between 2 individuals who realize they are standing shoulder to shoulder in the exact same impenetrable darkness. For the next 2 hours we talked. We didn't discuss our respective survival odds. We didn't talk about the grueling chemotherapy protocols or the terrifying reality of the surgeon's knife. Instead, we talked about the bizarre, almost impressive ability of hospital food to be simultaneously revolting and strangely comforting. We dissected the highly specific, deeply unnerving acoustic properties of a trauma ward at 2 o'clock in the morning. And we mutually agreed on a dark, undeniable truth, that real fear, the primal raw terror of impending death, actually has a distinct physical scent. It isn't a poetic metaphor. It is an aggressive, acrid odor that hangs heavy in the air, a mixture of cold sweat, clinical bleach, and sheer panic. Then at exactly 3:11 a.m., the glowing rectangle on my nightstand lit up the darkness. I picked it up. I read the message. I read it again, my brain violently struggling to process the syntax. "I want a divorce. I don't need a sick husband. Good luck with the surgery." Something catastrophic occurred within my central nervous system. My hands, which had been perfectly steady just moments before, began to violently tremble. The transformation took exactly 3 seconds. It was the terrifying physical manifestation of an earthquake bringing down a skyscraper. Completely fine, totally stable, holding the line, and then suddenly, violently, not fine at all. Elena was watching me closely. She possessed the razor-sharp observational skills of a seasoned predator. "Bad news?" she asked, her voice dropping into a low, serious register. I slowly held the phone up, turning the glowing screen toward her. "I honestly don't know why I did it. I didn't want sympathy, perhaps. In that moment of absolute, blinding shock, my deeply analytical brain simply required a secondary witness. I needed another human being to visually confirm that the words were real, that I wasn't actively hallucinating due to the pre-operative narcotics dripping into my veins." She squinted slightly, reading the glowing text. I watched her face intently. I watched her expression perform a highly complex, deeply controlled sequence. A brief flash of shock, followed by a surge of aggressive anger, before it violently locked down into a state of absolute, freezing stillness. "Your wife," she stated, her tone completely devoid of inflection. "Ex-wife, apparently," I replied, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. "She sent a divorce text in the middle of the night, on the very eve of your major surgery." Elena didn't phrase it as a question. She was laying out the tactical reality of the strike. A heavy pause hung in the air. "She is a very special, highly elite class of coward." There was something about the sheer, unapologetic flatness of her assessment that cracked the fragile dam I had been desperately holding together since 3/11. It didn't break me completely, but it fractured the facade just enough. "You need to look at this logically, Daniel," Elena said, her voice cutting through my rising panic like a steel blade. "You should be aggressively celebrating right now. The toxic trash in your life just voluntarily took itself out to the curb." I let out a harsh, barking laugh. It was a horrible, jagged sound, like heavy machinery grinding without oil. "You should seriously consider trademarking that phrase and putting it on a greeting card. I'll personally look into the licensing rights for you." "How long were you married?" she asked, entirely ignoring my pathetic attempt at deflection. 12 years. Elena was quiet for a long moment. When she finally spoke, the sharp edge in her voice had slightly softened, but the underlying steel remained. "I am sorry. 12 years is a massive investment. The loss is very real and it is going to hurt like hell, even when the person who walked away wasn't worth keeping in the first place." "I don't even know what the hell to do right now," I whispered. I wasn't talking to Elena specifically. I was talking to the ceiling, to the suffocating room, to the vast, empty darkness that was aggressively closing in around me. "Right now," she commanded, her voice suddenly snapping with the authority of a battlefield commander. "You do absolutely nothing regarding that text message. You focus entirely on surviving the next 8 hours on the operating table. You secure your own survival first. Every other piece of garbage gets sorted out and dealt with after you wake up." "That is incredibly easy to say," I shot back, my frustration flaring. "It is incredibly hard to say," she corrected me gently, but firmly. "And it is even harder to execute, but I am saying it to you anyway, because it is the absolute, undeniable truth." She looked at me from the adjacent bed. Her face was a study in pure, unadulterated resilience. She looked simultaneously exhausted and fiercely indomitable. It was the uncompromising expression of a human being who had made a highly deliberate, conscious decision that she was absolutely not going to allow the current catastrophic circumstances to destroy her. "You know what?" I said, the unhinged, dangerous edge of severe sleep deprivation and profound terror bleeding heavily into my voice. "If we both actually make it out of surgery tomorrow, we should just get married. Cut out the middleman completely. Let's just skip straight ahead to the part where someone actually has the spine to show up and stay when the alarms start going off." It was a joke. It was obviously a dark, desperate joke, born out of pure trauma. Elena looked at me for a very long moment. Her dark eyes didn't waver. There was no pity, no amusement. "Okay," she said, with absolute terrifying certainty. And right at that exact second, the heavy door swung open, and Nurse Patrice marched into the room to check my blood pressure. Patrice was 63 years old, built like a brick wall, and possessed the hardened expression of a woman who had survived everything the world could possibly throw at her. She had seen so much human tragedy, so much melodramatic chaos within these hospital walls, that very little could actually surprise her. She looked at Elena, she looked at me, she looked back at Elena, her eyes narrowing suspiciously. "What exactly happened in here?" Patrice demanded, her hands on her hips. "He just asked me to marry him," Elena stated pleasantly, as if discussing the cafeteria menu. Patrice went completely still, her veteran composure momentarily shattered. She slowly turned her head and stared at me with an expression I had absolutely no framework to interpret. It wasn't amusement, it wasn't warmth, it was something closely resembling profound, red alert panic, wearing a very thin, polite hat. "Sir," Patrice said, measuring every single syllable with extreme caution, "do you have absolutely any idea who you just asked to marry you?" The surgical procedure lasted exactly 7 hours and 14 minutes. My younger sister, Greta, had immediately boarded a red-eye flight from Baton Rouge the second she heard the news. She was currently pacing nervously in the family waiting room, holding the leash of my golden retriever, Henderson. I still have absolutely no idea how she managed to convince hospital security to allow a 90-pound dog into the oncology wing, but Greta has always possessed a terrifying talent for aggressively manipulating authority figures. and making strict rules temporarily forget they exist. I do not remember emerging from the heavy anesthesia with any degree of grace. The very first word that stumbled out of my dry, cracked lips was Henderson. The second word was Rachel, but I pronounced it with a distinct upward inflection, formatting it as a question. It was the specific tone a man uses when inquiring about an old, misplaced tool. He knows it's missing, but he isn't entirely sure if he actually wants to find it. The third word was Alina. Greta immediately cornered the recovery nurse, demanding to know if the heavy narcotics were inducing severe hallucinations. The nurse, apparently recalling the bizarre 3 a.m. proposal, made a highly complex facial expression that Greta has never been able to fully articulate to this day. Dr. Patel walked into my recovery room at exactly 2 o'clock the following afternoon. "We achieved clean margins," he stated, his voice carrying the cautious, measured weight of a veteran surgeon who never makes promises he can't keep. "The mass was resected entirely. We successfully extracted the entire tumor without compromising the surrounding vascular structures. The pathology report will take a few days to finalize, but as of this exact moment, I am remaining cautiously optimistic." He paused, looking me directly in the eyes. "You did well, Daniel. Clean margins. Cautiously optimistic. My liver, against all statistical odds, was going to allow me to keep living. But the woman I had built my entire adult life around was absolutely not going to be there to share it with me." Before Greta could physically intervene, I croaked out a question about Elena. "She is alive," stated Terrence, the afternoon shift nurse, answering with the crisp, unwavering professionalism of a man who knew exactly who I was talking about. "She made it through the procedure, deep within my chest, a heavy, invisible knot violently unclenched. I hadn't even realized how tightly my nervous system had been wound around the fate of a woman I had known for less than 4 hours. She appeared in the doorway on the 3rd day of my recovery. She was wearing dark, tailored trousers and a slate-colored silk blouse. She moved into the room with the careful, highly deliberate mechanics of a person whose torso had very recently been sliced open with a scalpel, and whose body was currently sending aggressive pain signals to remind her of the strict terms of her continued survival. In her right hand, she held a cheap paper coffee cup branded with the hospital cafeteria logo. She held it out toward me. "This coffee is absolutely terrible," she announced. "But the nursing staff informed me that you successfully survived your surgery, so I figured you had officially earned the right to drink this garbage." She didn't hover awkwardly near the door. She didn't display the timid hesitation of a polite visitor. She walked straight over and sat down in the heavy armchair beside my bed with the aggressive ease of someone who was entirely accustomed to claiming whatever space she desired. "I heard a highly amusing rumor that you woke up from anesthesia aggressively asking for me," she said, a faint smirk playing on her lips. My surgical team felt that this information was medically relevant to my recovery. "Did you get clean margins?" I asked, bypassing the joke entirely. Yes, a profound, almost invisible shadow moved behind her dark eyes. It was a fleeting second of genuine, raw relief, instantly swallowed up and covered by her impenetrable professional armor. "You?" Yes, we sat there in silence, allowing the monumental weight of that shared victory to settle over us. Two human beings who had been desperately fighting for their lives in the dark, just 4 days ago, were now sitting in a sunlit hospital room, drinking terrible coffee and simply existing. "Are you ever going to tell me?" I finally asked. She raised a single, perfectly sculpted eyebrow. "Tell you what?" "Who you actually are." When you walked out of the room that night, Nurse Patrice looked like she was about to suffer a massive cardiac event. "Nurse Patrice is an incredibly dramatic woman," she replied dismissively. But then her gaze locked onto mine, steady and unyielding. "My full legal name is Elena Vasquez Carr." The name landed in the room like a heavy piece of ordnance. It took my brain a solid 3 seconds to fully process the data, and then it hit me with the force of a freight train. The Carr Foundation, Vasquez, Carr Industries. The massive brass plaque bolted to the wall directly outside this exact wing of the hospital that proudly read, "The Carr Center for Oncological Research, dedicated to the memory of Maria Vasquez Carr." "My mother died in this exact hospital 17 years ago," she stated, her voice devoid of any boastful fanfare. "I have spent the last 15 years of my life aggressively utilizing my resources to ensure that other people have vastly better odds of surviving than she did." "You are that Vasquez Carr," I said, feeling my throat go completely dry. "Usually people sound significantly more impressed when they figure it out," she noted dryly. "I am currently operating at roughly 60% capacity. You are going to have to cut the crippled structural engineer a little bit of slack." The corner of her mouth twitched upward. "You really had absolutely no idea. I aggressively proposed to a billionaire philanthropist at 3 o'clock in the morning as a trauma-induced stress joke." "You did," she nodded, and I said, "Okay, why?" I asked, genuine curiosity overriding my shock. Elena turned her head, looking out the large window at the city skyline. "My ex-husband filed for divorce and completely abandoned the marriage the exact same week my company went public. His specific excuse was that he wanted to be married to a normal woman, not a massive corporate brand. He heavily preferred me as something small and manageable, something he could easily contain and control. I have spent the last 6 years of my life being constantly told by weak men that the version of me that possesses power and agency is the version that is fundamentally unlovable. That I am too aggressive, too driven, too commanding, and far too unwilling to dismantle my own life to cater to someone else's fragile ego." She turned back to face me, her eyes burning with an intense, quiet fire. And then, at 3 o'clock in the morning, a man who had just been brutally informed by his own wife that sick, vulnerable husbands aren't worth keeping around. She paused, taking a slow breath. "You asked me that question in a way that had absolutely nothing to do with what I own, what I control, or what I can provide. You had no idea who I was. You just saw me as a fellow human being sitting in the dark, and you decided I was a highly reasonable companion for whatever hell came next." "It was just a terrible joke," I said softly. "Was it?" she challenged, her voice razor-sharp. Right at that exact second, my smartphone violently buzzed on the tray table. We both looked down. It was Rachel. She wasn't hiding behind a cowardly text message this time. She was actively calling me. Elena's facial expression didn't change, but her physical posture instantly shifted. The relaxed stillness vanished, replaced entirely by the coiled, lethal tension of a predator actively locking onto a target. I hit the accept button and put the call on speakerphone. I didn't consciously plan it. My tactical instincts simply demanded that I have a witness for the incoming assault. "Daniel, you finally decided to answer the phone," Rachel said. Her voice was cold, clipped, and completely devoid of any emotional warmth. "I was actively undergoing a major surgical procedure to have a tumor removed from my body, Rachel." "I know, I'm glad you're okay, but we urgently need to discuss the next steps, my lawyer." "You already retained a lawyer?" I interrupted, a freezing chill shooting straight down my spine. "I have had legal counsel on retainer since February. I needed to ensure I was fully prepared. This isn't personal, Daniel. Try not to be emotional about it. February, 4 months ago, while I was driving myself to terrifying oncology appointments alone, while I was sitting in sterile waiting rooms aggressively, taking notes on my own mortality, she was sitting in a plush law office, cold-bloodedly calculating the strategic division of our marital assets. You sent me a divorce text at 3 o'clock in the morning, the night before I went under the knife." I growled, my anger finally breaching the surface. "I didn't want to add unnecessary stress by having a dramatic confrontation in person," she replied, employing the condescending tone of an adult speaking to a petulant child. "Is he standing right there with you?" I asked. A heavy absolute silence flooded the line. "Who?" she asked, her voice faltering slightly. "You know exactly who." Her hesitation confirmed the catastrophic reality faster and more brutally than any verbal confession ever could. "What is his name?" I demanded. "Connor," she finally admitted, her tone shifting into a defensive posture. "Connor Walsh. He is a senior colleague of mine, Connor Walsh. I had personally hosted that miserable bastard at my own dining room table 3 separate times. I had shaken his hand and shared a drink with him at her firm's holiday party last December. I had actually thought he was a decent, respectable guy. He was there in February, I stated, locking the timeline into place. She completely ignored the accusation. Regarding the house, Rachel pressed forward with ruthless efficiency. I am going to need you to be highly reasonable regarding the equity split. My lawyer has clearly advised me that we can execute this process cleanly and rapidly if you simply agree to cooperate. Reasonable. It is the absolute favorite, weaponized buzzword, employed by people who have already decided exactly how violently unreasonable they are allowed to be. Rachel, I said, my voice dropping into a dangerous, gravelly rumble. You are currently occupying my home with the man you were actively sleeping with while I was undergoing cancer diagnostics. You secretly retained a divorce attorney 4 months ago without uttering a single word to me. You fired off a cowardly divorce text the night before my major surgery. Please, explain to me precisely what the word reasonable means in this specific tactical context. Elena, who had been sitting in absolute silence, suddenly reached into the interior pocket of her blazer. She retrieved a heavy, embossed business card and placed it delicately on the hospital blanket right next to my hand. I read the crisp black lettering. The Vasquez Carr Legal Defense Initiative. Patient and Family Advocacy Services, Elena Vasquez Carr, Executive Director. I already have elite legal representation, I stated flatly. Rachel's voice instantly sharpened with derision. What lawyer? Your sister Greta? No, something significantly heavier. Elena leaned forward, moving closer to the phone's microphone. Mrs. Marsh, her voice completely dominated the room. It was the precise, terrifyingly calm voice of a supreme apex predator who frequently addressed international congressional committees. It carried the crushing, undeniable gravity of a person who never needed to raise her volume to completely command a room. Who the hell is this? Rachel demanded, her arrogant facade cracking. Elena Vasquez Carr. The silence that radiated from the phone speaker changed its chemical composition entirely. It was the heavy, suffocating silence of absolute paralyzed fear. Your husband is currently recovering from major surgery within a medical facility where I exert a significant amount of operational influence, Elena continued, delivering each word like a sniper executing a target. He is classified as highly medically vulnerable. Therefore, any aggressive attempt by you or your legal counsel to pressure, coerce, or harass him regarding asset division while he is hospitalized will be meticulously documented and immediately actioned upon in civil court. Rachel tried to speak, but Elena effortlessly steamrolled right over her. The marital home shall not be further occupied by any non-resident parties. All joint financial accounts must remain absolutely untouched. If either of these strict conditions is violated, heavily documented evidence will be hand-delivered to your opposing counsel within 60 minutes. Furthermore, the specific timeline of the legal consultation you secretly initiated in February, while your husband was actively undergoing severe cancer diagnostics, has been heavily noted. Family court judges tend to find that specific timeline extremely relevant when conducting their good faith conduct assessments. The line was so quiet I could physically hear Rachel's panicked breathing through the speaker. Mrs. Marsh, Elena concluded, executing the final kill shot. I sincerely hope you fully understand the tactical position you are currently in. Rachel terminated the call immediately. She didn't argue, she didn't threaten, she simply ran. Greta, who had apparently been eavesdropping outside my door for the past 5 minutes, violently pushed her way into the room. I have absolutely no idea who this woman is or what the hell is happening right now, my sister announced, staring at Elena with wide eyes. But I have officially decided that I am going to be extremely happy about it. The final pathology report from Dr. Patel's laboratory was officially delivered 48 hours later. The detailed forensic analysis confirmed the aggressive malignancy of the primary tumor, but it simultaneously verified the most critical piece of tactical intelligence. The entire mass had been completely excised. The surgical margins were absolutely clear, and there was zero evidence of any metastatic invasion into the surrounding lymph nodes. Within the highly cautious medical community, no professional is ever willing to deploy the word cured at this early stage of the battlefield, but the word optimistic began heavily populating my medical charts. And as a man who had recently survived a total collapse, I rapidly learned how to aggressively anchor myself to that specific word in order to keep moving forward. Immediately following Elena's terrifying phone call, Rachel panicked, rapidly packed her belongings, and permanently vacated my house. My newly appointed legal representation was Patricia O'Shea, a highly lethal veteran litigator boasting 30 years of aggressive matrimonial combat experience. She had been directly recommended through the Vasquez Carr Advocacy Network, and she immediately went to war. Patricia meticulously reconstructed the hidden timeline of my marriage with the cold, unfeeling precision of an autopsy. The final picture she painted was both incredibly vindicating and quietly devastating to my core. She uncovered Rachel's legal consultations from February and tracked the systematic financial transfers draining our accounts. She secured the digital receipts for luxury hotel reservations booked under the names Rachel Marsh and Connor Walsh, exposing an affair that had been actively ongoing since the previous spring. She engineered this entire operation with extreme care. Patricia informed me during our initial strategy meeting, her eyes sharp and predatory. And I am going to make absolutely certain that her meticulous planning costs her an astronomical amount of money. The ensuing legal warfare raged on for 4 grueling months. The final settlement was neither clean nor fast, completely obliterating Rachel's arrogant initial demands. Patricia O'Shea was a methodical hunter, and the brutal reality of the February timeline hung over every single arbitration meeting like a massive, highly unstable storm cell. In the end, I emerged victorious. I secured absolute uncontested ownership of the house. I kept my dog, Henderson, but what I had permanently lost in the wreckage was 12 solid years of blind confidence in my own ability to judge human character. I was forced to roll up my sleeves and undertake the agonizing, deeply unglamorous labor of physically rebuilding my entire life from a pile of shattered concrete. Elena and I did not immediately crash into a volatile whirlwind romance. We were both significantly older, heavily bruised, and possessed enough tactical awareness to distinguish between a trauma bond forged under extreme pressure and the solid foundation required to build something genuinely real. Instead, we simply started drinking coffee together. The aggressively terrible hospital cafeteria sludge was eventually replaced by decent espresso from a small, quiet cafe located exactly 3 blocks down from St. Augustine's. We met there once, exactly 2 weeks after my official discharge. We met there again the following week, and then, without any grand romantic declarations or formal scheduling, those coffee meetings simply evolved into a permanent, recurring appointment. It became an essential fixture in our lives, primarily because the alternative of not seeing each other had become entirely unthinkable. She began to open up about her mother. She detailed how her initial grief had been heavily disguised as massive philanthropy, a desperate attempt to exert control over a chaotic universe. But slowly, over the years, that forced philanthropy had organically transformed into something far more honest and powerful, a mission executed purely for its own inherent value. In return, I spoke to her extensively about bridges. I explained the complex, unforgiving physics of structural tension and compression. I detailed how every single massive structure on this planet is, fundamentally, an endless, ongoing negotiation between opposing physical forces. I explained that the elite bridges, the ones capable of remaining standing for centuries, are not the rigid structures that stubbornly attempt to resist the immense power of nature. The bridges that survive are the ones intelligently designed to flex, adapt, and move in harmony with the massive loads they are forced to carry. You literally analyze every single aspect of the world through the lens of structural engineering, she observed one afternoon, her dark eyes studying me intensely over the rim of her coffee cup. It's a severe occupational hazard. The vast majority of people treat romantic relationships as if they are massive, rigid blocks of concrete, she said softly, tracing the rim of her cup with a manicured finger. They foolishly construct them to bear one fixed, highly specific load. But that's not how the real world operates, is it? No, I replied, holding her steady gaze. They are absolutely not rigid. Exactly 1 year after the darkest night of my life, I stood awkwardly behind a polished wooden podium at the Carr Foundation annual gala. The organizing committee had specifically requested that I deliver a short speech representing the countless beneficiaries of their aggressive patient advocacy program. I am a structural engineer. I am fundamentally designed to analyze blueprints and calculate stress loads in quiet rooms. I am absolutely not built to deliver emotional speeches under the glaring, blinding lights of a high society ballroom. But I stood my ground, gripped the edges of the podium, and spoke the brutal truth. I told the packed ballroom that the absolute worst, most terrifying night of my entire existence had taken place inside a sterile, freezing hospital room at 3 o'clock in the morning. I told them about the exact moment I realized I had permanently lost the life I had so foolishly believed I would inhabit forever. But I also told them that right there in the smoldering wreckage of that collapse, I had discovered something vastly more honest and resilient. I explained that the most terrifying aspect of surviving any major catastrophe, whether it is a lethal medical diagnosis or a brutal personal betrayal, is the daunting realization that you actually have to continue living in the chaotic aftermath. You are the one who has to physically sort through the jagged debris. You have to step up and become the architect who rebuilds the structure from scratch. Alina was sitting directly in the third row. She was wearing a stunning, dark navy blue evening gown. She was making a highly unconvincing attempt at pretending to review the printed notes on her lap, but her intense dark eyes were locked entirely on me. She was watching me with that specific, deep, patient attention that she reserved exclusively for the rare things she deemed truly worthy of her time. In the far back of the massive room, sitting quietly at a corner table, Nurse Patrice was nursing a glass of champagne, sporting a profoundly satisfied smirk. Later that evening, after the gala had officially concluded, Elena and I stood alone on the wide granite steps outside the venue, watching the chaotic, vibrant energy of the city rushing past us. Elena tilted her head, giving me a sideways, incredibly sharp look. I explicitly remember you telling me that you were absolutely terrible at public speaking. I am terrible at public speaking. She fully rotated her body, facing me directly. You said okay. I instantly understood the tactical maneuver she was executing. She was deliberately circling back to the absolute beginning. She was zeroing in on the chaotic, surreal absurdity of our very first interaction at 3:11 a.m. in that freezing hospital room, two broken, terrified human beings sitting in pathetic medical gowns, engaging in a dark joke that wasn't actually meant to be a joke at all. I did say okay, I acknowledged softly. Were you actually being serious when you asked? I looked deeply into her eyes. I thought about the 12 grueling years I had wasted blindly trusting a hollow foundation that had been actively crumbling beneath my feet. I thought about the 7 terrifying hours I had spent unconscious on a surgical table, fighting a war I couldn't see. I thought about a ferociously powerful woman who had stared directly at the darkest, most humiliating moment of my life and coldly declared that the trash had taken itself out with the absolute, unflinching honesty of a true ally. I thought about the entire year of coffee, deep conversation, and the slow, deliberate, highly engineered structural work we had executed together to build a foundation that was genuinely designed to hold massive weight. Elena, I said, my voice dropping into a low, steady rumble. I am a senior structural engineer. I absolutely refuse to ever commit to building a structure that I haven't personally, aggressively stress-tested. The corner of her mouth slowly curved upward into a devastatingly beautiful smile. And, I concluded, stepping closer to her, I have been relentlessly stress-testing this specific connection for the past 12 months. She fell silent for a long moment. The cool night wind blew past us, rustling the heavy fabric of her gown. "Okay," she finally said. It was the exact same word. It was delivered with the exact same quiet, unyielding certainty as the very first time. But we were standing in a completely different world now. And the most profoundly beautiful thing about that specific word, especially when it is spoken by a woman who fully intends to honor the weight behind it, is that it absolutely does not sound like an ending. It sounds exactly like what it truly is. The very first unbreakable load-bearing block being lowered into place to support a completely new life.